Richard Harris there, manfully combating against an act of God with a downpour, or an act of, just an act actually. But now we're going to go straight on to A.C. Grayling, a very well-known philosopher, academic author, author of Against All Gods, apart from other books. A.C. Grayling.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, there is a confrontation between people who have religious commitment and those who don't. And it has become a rather bad-tempered one since 9/11, since the atrocities in New York and Washington in 2001. And that date, what happened on that date, I think changed the nature of the debate between people on either side of this confrontation. Prior to it, I think if people had a religious commitment of some kind, generally speaking, in this country at least, they kept it to themselves. Their religious proclivities were rather like their sex life. They didn't talk about it at dinner parties very much. And when one met somebody, if one wasn't oneself religious, who is religious, one wouldn't press the point very much. One would treat them rather as if there had been a death in the family, which in the case of Christianity is reasonably apt. Since 2001, however, things have changed. And they've changed in that people who don't have a religious commitment have very often spoken out robustly and uncompromisingly and have been very frank about their point of view. And it is this, I think, the tone of the discussion which has alarmed people who are defenders and apologists for religion. And it puts me in mind, rather, of a cartoon I saw recently, which has two panels. And in the first panel, there is a cleric, and he's brandishing a religious symbol of some kind, as it might be a crucifix if he's a Christian, or a crescent if he's a Muslim. And he's brandishing this, and he's bashing somebody over the head with it. And as he does so, he shouts, with each blow, he shouts, "Infidel, blasphemer, homosexual, uppity woman, abortionist." And finally, the person being bashed over the head gets rather exasperated and takes the religious symbol and makes as if to break it over her knee, at which the cleric says, "Hey, hey, hey, respect." And that, I think, absolutely sums up the person who drew that cartoon will be delighted. That rather sums up the rhetorical position today. What one must understand is this, that there are charges on both sides of the debate about not understanding the other person's point of view. People of a religious commitment say this about those who don't share their views. They say, "You don't understand our position, what it's like to have a commitment, what it means to us." And that's an odd thing for them to say, because, of course, the great majority of people who are not religious used to be, and have become non-religious because they've given up the commitment that they were led into as children, taught at school, taught by their community, church, mosque, temple, synagogue. They've given it up sometimes with a great deal of difficulty and pain, but they understand very well what was involved and what the story is that their opponents in the discussion are committed to. But people on the religious side of the debate don't really quite see always what the point is, those who oppose them. And that's what I'd like very, very briefly to explain, because in fact there are three quite separate issues here, although they naturally connect with one another. There is the question of the metaphysical nature of the universe, what kinds of things there are in the universe. People who are religious, almost all of them anyway, think that there are supernatural agencies of some kind in the universe, gods, goddesses, angels and archangels, demons, devils. And people who don't share that view are called by religious people atheists. That's a religious term used to describe people who don't share the metaphysics of the religious. Now, I much rather call myself an atheist, or an agoblinist, or an apixiist, and so on, for all the things that I don't believe exist. But if I were to call myself an atheist or an apixiist, it would move me onto the ground of those people who believe in fairies and pixies, as if that was a discussion worth having. My point is that I don't think that there are supernatural agencies in the world on very, very good and considered grounds. Remember that what we take to be the case in the universe has to be proportional to the evidence that we have for it. And in this metaphysical question of what kind of place the universe is, there are very few grounds indeed for thinking that there is anything other than what natural laws reveal to us in all the beauty and excellence of the universe. The second thing, and this really is where the debate takes off, is secularism. And you don't have to be an atheist or an apixiist to be a secularist. You might be a religious secularist. Secularist is somebody who believes that questions of public policy, questions of the complex pluralistic society we live in, should not be under the government of any one religion or indeed of the religions working in committee. Secularism is about the place of religious faith in the public square. And what a reasonable secularist thinks and should think is this, that religion and religious organizations has every right to exist and every right to have its say. But it has no greater right than any other self-constituted, self-elected interest group in society. A church is like a trades union or a political party or the Women's Institute or the Boy Scouts. It is instituted itself and it's there to put a point of view, entitled to do so. But as it happens all through history, still in our own country today and in many places in the world, religious organizations have a very privileged place in society. They have an amplified voice, much greater than the voice of other organizations in society, with the exception of political parties that succeed in getting their candidates into the legislature. And that I think, is where a good deal of the acerbity enters the debate. I'll give you an example. As you know, President Obama is trying to get some legislation through Congress in Washington at the moment to have a national health care insurance scheme. Just very recently, in the last few days, the Roman Catholic Church, which is a very powerful lobby in the United States, has succeeded in getting a clause accepted by the House of Representatives, which provides that nobody will benefit from this national health insurance scheme in order to get a termination of pregnancy, to get an abortion. It's just one very small example. One could cite many, many examples across many societies. For example, Taliban-governed areas of Afghanistan where women and girls are not allowed education or access to healthcare and the like, where, thank you, it says speak up, I'm sorry if you can't hear me, where access to social goods of various kinds are denied because of questions of dogma, because a particular religious outlook doesn't favor that way of doing things or thinking about things. And when religious organizations have that impact on the lives of individuals in society, denying women their rightful place in education, denying the opportunity for people to make choices about what happens in their personal lives, where there is too much interference in the public square. And remember, in our own country, we have an established religion which allows representatives of the established church to sit in the legislature and to vote on laws that affect us all. Richard Harries very kindly once had me to lunch in the House of Lords and woke me up to the fact that it's not only the current bishops who can sit in the House of Lords, but a number of former bishops, like Richard himself, who have become life peers. And they have an influence on the laws that are passed in our country. And it's that raises hackles and which makes the discussion of these matters sometimes a pretty robust one. So I mentioned atheism, mentioned secularism there, and finally there is an aspect of the debate which is more or less left out of account altogether. And that is that people who don't have a religious commitment are very often humanist in their outlook, in their ethics. And humanism is a view about the good for human individuals and the good for society, which tries to premise itself on our very best understanding of human nature and the human condition, of how things are for human beings. And it tries to erect a structure of ethical concern between individuals, urging the importance of good relationships between people, respect between human individuals on the basis of their human individuality, not on the basis of some identity that they choose for themselves, in the hope of trying to make this a collegial, cooperative, and flourishing world. That aspect of the debate is suppressed because the churches, the religious bodies, arrogate to themselves the claim that only they really have the right view about ethics, about the right way to live. So I would argue that given the fact that to be a non-believer is to stand in a relation to religion in the same way as the non-stamp collector stands to the stamp collector, that is, you just simply don't share that view. It's extremely hard indeed to be a fundamentalist non-stamp collector. You just don't take that particular view, and the fact that you don't says nothing else about what you believe and how you behave. Thank you very much.